William Thompson's wire cutters froze midair, his weathered hands trembling as he stared at the massive German shepherd tangled in barbed wire. The dog wasn't growling or snapping, she was pleading, her intelligent brown eyes locked onto his with desperate recognition that made his chest tighten. This wasn't just any dog trapped in his back fence line. The coffee mug slipped from his free hand, shattering against the rocky ground as the bitter liquid splashed across his worn boots. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing in his ears like thunder. The barbed wire had been arranged deliberately, forming the letter M across the animal's bloodied coat, the same initial carved into his son's military headstone. Michael's dog tags glinted beneath matted fur, impossible yet undeniable. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice cracking like autumn leaves. "Liberty, Michael's liberty." The dog he'd turned away 3 years ago, too broken by grief to bear another reminder of his dead son. Who had done this? And why did he feel like someone was watching him from the shadows? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William "Bill" Thompson had always believed that some men were born to lose everything twice, first in war, then in peace. At 72, he was living proof of that cruel mathematics. The morning coffee ritual remained unchanged. 2 cups, 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware arranged on the scarred oak table Margaret had inherited from her mother. The second-place setting gathered dust while his black coffee grew cold, but muscle memory was stronger than logic. 3 years since Michael's flag-draped coffin, 18 months since Margaret's cancer finally claimed her, and Bill still couldn't break the habit of setting a table for ghosts. His hands shook as he stared at the folded American flag on the mantel, positioned next to Margaret's reading glasses and the pill bottle he'd been counting for weeks. 47 oxycodone tablets. More than enough for an old man with a failing heart and nothing left to lose. The suicide note sat sealed but unsent on his kitchen counter, addressed to nobody in particular. Who would miss him? The VA sent automated appointment reminders. The bank sent foreclosure warnings. The neighbors avoided eye contact at the mailbox. Even God seemed to have unlisted his number. Bill lived in his father's cabin now, 23 acres of Appalachian wilderness an hour outside Charleston, West Virginia. The isolation suited his depression, though the mortgage payments didn't suit his veteran's pension. $12,000 in back taxes, 30 days to pay, or lose the house where 3 generations of Thompson men had learned to hunt, fish, and serve their country. Margaret's voice still echoed in the empty rooms, usually offering gentle corrections to his deteriorating self-care. "Check the back fence before you go to town, Billy. I heard something crying in the woods last night." He'd dismissed it as imagination, grief playing tricks on a lonely mind. But the sound came again at dawn, not quite animal, not quite human, carrying a note of despair that resonated in his hollow chest like a tuning fork. Bill pulled on his father's old navy peacoat and grabbed the wire cutters from the tool shed. If some poor creature was tangled up in the barbed wire boundary fence, he owed it a clean death at minimum. The property line needed checking anyway. The bank would want everything documented before the foreclosure. The November air bit at his exposed skin as he followed the fence line toward the sound. West Virginia mornings carried the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. His boots crunched through frost-brittle grass, each step a small rebellion against arthritic knees and a heart that skipped beats like a scratched record. The crying grew louder as he approached the back corner of his property, where the fence disappeared into a tangle of blackberry bushes and pin oaks. Something large moved in the undergrowth, thrashing against metal with diminishing strength. Bill parted the branches and stepped into a clearing he'd never noticed before, wire cutters raised and ready. What he found there would change everything he thought he knew about loss, loyalty, and second chances. The German shepherd lay motionless in a web of rusted barbed wire, her massive frame rising and falling with labored breaths that misted in the cold morning air. Blood matted her thick coat where the wire had bitten deep, and her golden brown eyes tracked Bill's movement with an intelligence that made his throat constrict. This wasn't the panicked thrashing of a wild animal caught in a trap. This was resignation, the kind Bill recognized from his own mirror each morning. "Easy, girl," he whispered, approaching with the slow deliberation his Navy training had drilled into him 40 years ago. Never rush into a situation you don't understand. Never assume the obvious explanation is the right one. The wire hadn't caught her randomly. Someone had arranged it in deliberate loops around her chest and front legs, creating a pattern that would tighten with every struggle. Whoever did this understood both engineering and cruelty. Bill knelt beside the trapped animal, his knees protesting against the damp ground. Up close, he could see the meticulous nature of her imprisonment, surgical precision disguised as accident. The wire had been threaded through itself in places, creating a puzzle that would require careful cutting to avoid severing arteries. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, positioning the wire cutters over the first strand. The dog's ears flicked at his voice, but she didn't flinch when the metal touched her fur. Military discipline, he realized. This animal had been trained not to fear tools or sudden movements. The first wire snapped with a sharp ping that echoed through the woods. The dog's body tensed, but instead of struggling, she seemed to exhale in relief. Bill worked methodically, talking in the low, steady voice he'd once used to calm spooked horses at his grandfather's farm. "You're not just any dog, are you?" Each cut revealed more evidence of professional training, the way she held perfectly still despite obvious pain, the alert positioning of her ears, the controlled breathing that spoke of stress inoculation exercises. "You're military?" As he freed her front legs, his fingers brushed against something hard beneath the matted fur around her neck. A collar, hidden under layers of dried blood and wilderness debris. Bill's hands shook as he worked to expose it, dreading what he might find. The metal tags caught the filtered sunlight, reflecting letters and numbers that hit him like a physical blow. Liberty, K9 Unit, Handler, SGen, Michael Thompson, 2019 to 2022. The wire cutters slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the rocky ground. Michael's Liberty. His voice cracked on his son's name, the first time he'd spoken it aloud in over a year. Liberty's tail moved once, not quite a wag, more like a question. Her eyes found his with heartbreaking directness, as if asking whether he remembered her. How could he forget? She'd been in every video call from Afghanistan, every letter home, every proud photograph Michael had sent. The bomb-sniffing dog who'd saved his unit a dozen times, who'd slept beside his cot, who'd been his son's closest companion in hell. "I sent you away," Bill whispered, shame burning in his chest like acid. "When they brought you home after Michael, I couldn't look at you, couldn't stand seeing you without him." Liberty made a soft sound. Not quite a whine, not quite forgiveness. She remembered him too. Bill's arthritic hands fumbled for the wire cutters, muscle memory overriding emotional paralysis. He had work to finish. The remaining wire wrapped around her hindquarters in a complex knot that required patience and precision. One wrong cut could sever the femoral artery. "Stay still, girl. I'm getting you out of this." His voice steadied as he focused on the task. This was something he could fix, something he could control. Unlike Michael's death, unlike Margaret's cancer, unlike the foreclosure notice taped to his kitchen cabinet. The final piece of wire came away with a sound like a guitar string snapping. Liberty was free. She lay still for a long moment, as if testing whether this was real or another cruel trick. Then, slowly, she rolled onto her side and attempted to stand. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and blood loss, but she managed to rise on unsteady paws. Bill reached out instinctively to steady her, and she leaned into his touch without hesitation. 3 years of abandonment, 2 years of living wild, months of someone's deliberate torture, and she still trusted him. "Come on," he said, wrapping one arm around her shoulders for support. "Let's get you home." As they made their slow way back toward the cabin, Bill couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the shadows. The wire arrangement had been too deliberate, too sophisticated for random cruelty. Someone had wanted Liberty caught exactly where Bill would find her. But who knew about their connection? And why now, after all this time? Liberty collapsed on the kitchen floor before Bill could guide her to the old dog bed he'd stored in the basement. Michael's dog bed, the one he'd shoved into storage the day the Army transport had delivered her home with a Purple Heart and 1,000-yard stare that mirrored his own. Blood seeped through her coat onto Margaret's worn linoleum, each crimson drop a reminder of how close he'd come to walking past that fence line forever. Bill's hands shook as he filled a bowl with warm water, muscle memory from battlefield first aid competing with 3 years of deliberate forgetting. "Easy, girl. Let me see how bad it is." He knelt beside Liberty, his knees creaking like old ship timbers. She lifted her massive head to watch him approach, and in her amber eyes he saw something that stopped his breath cold, recognition that went deeper than mere memory. She knew him, not just as Michael's father, but as the man who'd turned his back when she needed him most. The wire had carved deep furrows across her chest and shoulders, precision cuts that spoke of methodical cruelty rather than accidental entanglement. But as Bill cleaned the wounds with trembling fingers, he discovered something that made his stomach lurch. The cuts were recent, hours old, not days. Someone had done this to her last night, then waited for him to find her. "Who's been hurting you?" he whispered, dabbing antiseptic on the worst gashes. Liberty's muscles tensed, but she didn't pull away, displaying the kind of trust that only comes from military training. Or desperation. As he worked, Bill's eyes traveled over her frame, cataloging the evidence of her missing years. She was thinner than he remembered, her ribs visible beneath winter-thick fur. Old scars crisscrossed her flanks, some from combat, others newer and more deliberate. Someone had been using her for target practice, he realized with growing horror. His fingers found something else as he examined her neck wound, a small, hard lump beneath the skin. Not a tumor, something artificial, a tracking device. He'd bet his Purple Heart on it. Jesus Christ. Bill sat back on his heels, the full implications crashing over him like a cold wave. "Someone's been watching you, tracking you." Liberty's ears swiveled toward the kitchen window, and she released a low growl that raised the hair on Bill's arms. He followed her gaze to the glass, seeing nothing but autumn woods and morning shadows. But Liberty's body language screamed danger, muscles coiled, hackles raised, every instinct on high alert. Bill struggled to his feet and moved to the window, pressing his face against the glass. The woods looked peaceful enough, but something felt wrong. Too quiet. No bird sounds, no rustling leaves. Even the wind had died. "We're being watched, aren't we?" he murmured, and Liberty's soft whine confirmed his fear. A memory surfaced unbidden. Michael's last video call 3 weeks before the IED took him. "Liberty's been acting strange, Dad. Won't eat, won't settle. She keeps staring at the perimeter like she knows something's coming." 2 days later, she'd detected the bomb that saved 6 lives. 2 days after that, she'd failed to detect the one that took Michael's. Now she was giving him the same warning. Bill's mind raced through possibilities. Who knew about Liberty's connection to his family? The Army had records, but those were classified. Michael's unit members were scattered or dead. The veterinarian who'd evaluated her for PTSD had been civilian contractor, Dr. Richard Sterling, a man whose cold efficiency had made Bill's skin crawl during their brief interactions. Sterling. Something about that name nagged at him, like a splinter working its way to the surface. He'd been the one to declare Liberty unfit for continued service after Michael's death. The one who'd recommended she be retired to civilian care instead of euthanized. The one who'd insisted Bill take her immediately, despite his obvious inability to cope. "Did you remember something about Dr. Sterling?" Bill asked Liberty, and her growl deepened. That was answer enough. Bill checked the locks on his doors, something he'd stopped bothering with since Margaret died. What was the point of security when you were hoping death would find you? But now, with Liberty's warm presence filling the empty spaces of his kitchen, survival felt possible again. Necessary. He pulled the curtains closed and carried Liberty to the living room, settling her on Michael's old military blanket near the fireplace. She accepted the comfort with dignity, but her eyes never stopped scanning the shadows. "I need to call someone," Bill muttered, reaching for his phone. But who? The local sheriff was a good man, but outmatched if this involved federal agencies or military contractors. The VA was a bureaucratic maze where urgent calls died in voicemail purgatory. Michael's old commanding officer had retired to Florida and wouldn't remember a traumatized old man or his dead son's dog. Liberty's head lifted suddenly, ears pricked toward the front of the house. A car was coming up the gravel drive. Engine sound too smooth for his ancient pickup, too quiet for the oil delivery truck. Bill moved to the living room window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A black sedan with government plates rolled to a stop beside his truck. Tinted windows hid the occupants, but the message was clear. "We know you're here." "Well, shit," Bill breathed, his hand instinctively moving to the service pistol he'd hidden in the hall closet after Margaret died. "Looks like they're done waiting." The car doors opened simultaneously, practiced coordination that spoke of military or law enforcement training. Two men emerged, one tall and lean with silver hair, the other younger with the kind of muscular build that came from serious gym time. Both wore dark suits despite the rural setting. The older man approached the front door with confident strides while his partner circled toward the back of the house. Professional flanking maneuver. These weren't social workers or VA counselors. "William Thompson?" The knock was polite but insistent. "Dr. Richard Sterling, Army Veterinary Corps. I believe you have something that belongs to me?" Liberty's growl became a snarl, her lips pulling back to reveal teeth designed for war. Every hair on her body stood upright, and she struggled to rise despite her injuries. "Stay down, girl," Bill whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Let me handle this." But even as he spoke, he knew they were trapped. Two armed men, one old broken-down sailor, and a wounded dog. The mathematics of survival had never looked worse. Sterling knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. Thompson, I know you're in there. We really should discuss Liberty's condition. She's been very sick, and I'm afraid her symptoms are contagious." The lie was smoothly delivered, but Bill caught the threat underneath. "Come quietly, or we'll make this ugly." He looked down at Liberty, who was now staring at him with absolute trust, waiting for orders that would determine whether they lived or died. For the first time in 3 years, William Thompson had something worth fighting for. Bill's service pistol felt alien in his arthritic hands as he crouched beside the living room window, watching Sterling's partner disappear around the side of the house. The Colt .45 had been his father's, then his, carried through 3 tours in the South China Sea and stored in mothballs for 40 years. He'd cleaned it obsessively after Margaret's funeral, part of a suicide plan that now seemed like cowardice. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your reluctance to cooperate," Sterling called through the door, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man accustomed to compliance. "But Liberty requires immediate medical attention. The longer we delay, the more she suffers." Liberty's ears flattened against her skull at the sound of Sterling's voice, and she tried again to rise, her powerful hindquarters trembling with the effort. Bill placed a gentle hand on her shoulders, feeling the rapid drumbeat of her heart beneath matted fur. "Easy, girl. He's not taking you anywhere." The words surprised him with their conviction. When had he decided to fight? When had survival become preferable to surrender? Sterling's knock came again, 3 measured raps that somehow conveyed both patience and threat. "I have documentation here, Mr. Thompson. Federal warrants for the recovery of military property. I'd hate to involve local law enforcement, but I will if necessary." Bill's mind raced through possibilities, discarding them as quickly as they formed. The phone was in the kitchen, but any call would take minutes to connect and longer to bring help. His truck keys hung by the back door, but Sterling's partner was already covering that escape route. The basement had a root cellar his grandfather had dug during the Depression, but getting Liberty down those steep stairs in her condition would be impossible. Through the gap in the curtains, he watched Sterling check his watch with theatrical patience. The man's silver hair caught the morning light, and Bill noticed something that made his blood run cold. Sterling wore a small pin on his lapel, barely visible but unmistakable to anyone who'd served. A Purple Heart. This wasn't just a government bureaucrat or military contractor. This was a veteran, someone who'd earned the right to wear that medal through blood and sacrifice. What could turn a decorated soldier into someone who tortured animals? "I know you're listening, William." Sterling's voice carried a different note now, almost conversational. "May I call you William? I feel like we know each other after all these months of observation. You're wondering about my credentials, aren't you? Purple Heart, Bronze Star, 23 years of faithful service to our great nation. Just like you. Just like your son." The mention of Michael hit like a physical blow. Bill's finger tightened on the trigger guard, and Liberty sensed his tension, her own growl rumbling deeper. "Michael was a fine soldier," Sterling continued, his voice carrying through the thin door as if he were in the room. "Exceptional handler, really. Liberty here responded to his commands better than most dogs respond to their own instincts. Quite a bond they had. Quite a team." "Shut up," Bill whispered, though he knew Sterling couldn't hear him. "Don't you talk about my son." "The interesting thing about military working dogs," Sterling went on, apparently addressing the entire morning air, "is how they process trauma. Humans, we rationalize. We find ways to make sense of senseless loss. But dogs just break. Liberty broke when Michael died, William. She broke completely." Bill could hear footsteps now, Sterling pacing on the front porch like a professor delivering a lecture. The casual tone made everything worse, turning Liberty's suffering into an academic discussion. "When the Army shipped her home to you, she was already exhibiting classic symptoms of canine PTSD, hypervigilance, social withdrawal, loss of appetite. Standard treatment protocols called for behavioral modification therapy, but you had your own grief to manage, didn't you?" The words cut deeper than any knife. Bill remembered those first horrible days after Liberty's arrival, the way she'd waited by the door for Michael to come home, the way she'd whined when Bill packed away Michael's belongings. He'd seen her pain and been unable to bear it, had loaded her into his truck and driven her to the county animal shelter, telling himself she'd be better off with a family who could give her proper attention. "She lasted 3 days at the shelter before she escaped," Sterling continued, his voice drawing closer to the window. "Remarkable, really, the way she found her way back here. 27 miles through unfamiliar territory, straight back to the last place she'd sensed Michael's scent. That's love, William. That's loyalty beyond human comprehension." Bill closed his eyes, remembering the morning he'd found Liberty on his front porch, muddy and exhausted, her eyes holding a hope that died when he called the shelter to come collect her again. The second time, he'd driven her there himself, staying to watch them lead her to a kennel in the back, telling himself it was for the best. The second escape took her longer, 5 days, but she came back. Do you know what you said to her that time, William? Sterling's shadow moved across the curtains, and Bill realized the man was standing directly outside the window. You said, "I can't look at you without seeing him." And then you drove her 40 miles away and left her at a no-kill shelter in Charleston. Liberty whimpered softly, as if the memory caused her physical pain. Bill's throat constricted with shame and grief so profound it threatened to choke him. "She escaped a third time," Sterling said softly. "But by then, you'd changed the locks, moved Michael's things to storage, erased every trace of your son from this house. So she waited, in the woods, by the creek, anywhere she could keep watch, waiting for you to remember what love meant." "Stop," Bill whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Please stop." "That's when I found her," Sterling continued, his voice now carrying a note of satisfaction. "2 years ago, living wild but still watching your house, still hoping. I offered her food, shelter, medical care. All she had to do was come with me. Do you know what she did?" Bill didn't want to know, but Sterling told him anyway. "She ran, even starving, even sick, even with winter coming, she ran, because she'd been abandoned before, and dogs remember everything, so I had to be patient. I had to earn her trust slowly, carefully. I had to make her believe that rescue was possible." Through the window, Bill could see Sterling's face now, pressed close to the glass. The man's eyes held a fervor that spoke of obsession, of a mind that had cracked under pressure and reformed around a single terrible purpose. "It took 18 months to trap her the first time," Sterling said, smiling, "but worth every hour of planning. Do you know what I discovered, William? Pain creates perfect soldiers. Suffering burns away everything soft, everything weak, everything unnecessary for survival. Your son knew that. Every soldier knows that." The pieces of Sterling's madness were falling into place, and Bill felt sick, understanding the shape they formed. "You've been torturing her." "I've been improving her," Sterling corrected, his voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "Each capture, each escape, each recovery has made her stronger, smarter, more resilient. She's becoming the perfect military working dog, one that can't be broken by loss or abandonment or grief." Liberty struggled to her feet despite her injuries, positioning herself between Bill and the window. Even wounded and weak, her protective instincts overrode everything else. She was guarding him the way she'd guarded Michael, the way she'd been trained to guard everyone who earned her loyalty. "The beautiful irony," Sterling continued, "is that you've been the key variable all along. Each time I release her, she comes back here, back to you. No matter how much pain, no matter how much fear, she always returns to the man who abandoned her. It's a perfect laboratory for studying the limits of canine devotion." Bill's rage finally overcame his fear. He stood pointing the pistol at Sterling's shadow beyond the glass. "Get off my property!" Sterling laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Or what? You'll shoot a decorated veteran? A man with federal authority to recover stolen military property? Think carefully, William. This can end easily with Liberty receiving the medical care she needs, or it can end badly, with local authorities finding an old man who snapped under pressure and threatened a federal officer. The threat was clear, but Bill no longer cared about consequences. Liberty had endured 2 years of torture because of his cowardice, his inability to handle his own grief. She'd suffered because he'd chosen his pain over her needs, his convenience over her loyalty. "The only place you're taking her is over my dead body," Bill said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "That," Sterling replied, "can be arranged." The kitchen window exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood frame. Sterling's partner moved with military precision, rolling through the opening and coming up in a combat crouch, pistol drawn and trained on the living room doorway. Bill heard Liberty's warning bark, followed by the heavy thud of boots on his kitchen floor. "Federal agents!" the younger man shouted, though his voice carried the kind of practiced authority that Bill recognized as theater. "Weapon down! Hands visible!" Bill pressed his back against the wall beside the living room entrance, his father's Colt trembling in his arthritic grip. Through the front window, he could see Sterling calmly walking back to the sedan, pulling on latex gloves with the methodical preparation of a surgeon or a butcher. "Clear the kitchen," Sterling called to his partner. "Subject is armed and unstable. Use necessary force." Liberty struggled to stand, her powerful frame wavering as she positioned herself between Bill and the kitchen doorway. Blood seeped through the bandages Bill had applied to her chest wounds, but her stance remained protective, ready to fight despite her injuries. "Stay down, girl," Bill whispered. "This isn't your fight." But even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. This had always been Liberty's fight, the same battle she'd waged for 2 years in the wilderness, choosing loyalty over safety, hope over survival instinct. The younger agent appeared in the doorway, scanning the living room with tactical efficiency. He was maybe 35, built like a linebacker, with the kind of buzz cut that screamed recent military discharge. His eyes found Bill crouched behind Margaret's recliner, and his weapon swung to track the movement. "Drop it, old man. Nobody needs to get hurt here." Bill stayed low, using the furniture for cover. "Federal agents don't break into private homes without warrants. You're not government." The agent smiled without humor. "Warrants are for people who matter. You're just a crazy old vet with a stolen dog." "Liberty isn't stolen. She's my son's dog. Your son's dead. Has been for 3 years. Time to let go." The casual cruelty in those words ignited something in Bill that he'd thought had died with Margaret. Rage, pure and clean, burned away the depression that had clouded his mind for months. His hands steadied on the pistol grip. "My son died serving his country. That dog served beside him. She's earned better than torture. She's earned whatever Dr. Sterling decides she's earned," the agent replied, taking a step into the living room. "The doc's got big plans for her. Scientific breakthrough stuff. She's gonna help train the next generation of war dogs." Through the broken kitchen window, Bill could hear Sterling talking on a radio, coordinating with someone. How many others were coming? How long before this became a massacre? Liberty made the decision for both of them. With a growl that seemed to rise from some primal place deeper than training or domestication, she launched herself at the agent despite her injuries. 90 pounds of muscle and fury struck him center mass, driving him backward into the kitchen door frame. The agent's pistol discharged into the ceiling, raining plaster dust down on the struggling figures. Liberty's jaws found his gun arm, her military training overriding pain and exhaustion. She'd been taught to disarm threats, and muscle memory took over where conscious thought failed. Bill rose from behind the recliner, his own weapon trained on the agent's center mass. "Tell her to release and I won't shoot you." The agent's face had gone white with pain. Liberty's jaws clamped around his forearm with crushing force. "Get it off! Get this thing off me!" "She's not a thing," Bill said quietly. "She's a soldier. And just like you used to be, before you became whatever this is." Sterling's voice cut through the chaos from the front porch. "Marcus, status report." The agent, Marcus, tried to shake Liberty loose, but she held on with the determination of a creature that had endured too much to quit now. Blood from her reopened wounds mixed with the glass shards on the kitchen floor, but her grip never wavered. "She won't let go until I tell her to," Bill said. "And I won't tell her to until you explain what Sterling really wants with her." Marcus's struggles weakened as shock set in. "Research," he gasped. "Stress conditioning. Making better soldiers. By torturing them? By teaching them that pain is temporary, but mission completion is forever." Marcus's voice carried the inflection of someone repeating a memorized speech. "Dr. Sterling lost his daughter in Kandahar. Bomb-sniffing dog missed an IED. His little girl was in the convoy." The revelation hit Bill like cold water. Sterling wasn't just a sadistic researcher. He was a grieving father, twisted by loss into something monstrous. The same grief that had driven Bill to abandon Liberty had driven Sterling to torture her. "How many dogs has he killed?" Bill asked. "None," Marcus said quickly. "He doesn't kill them. He improves them, makes them stronger, faster, more aggressive. The military's been buying his training protocols for 2 years now." Bill's stomach turned. Sterling wasn't operating in isolation. He had official sanction, government contracts, institutional support. Liberty's torture was taxpayer-funded research. "Liberty!" Sterling's voice called from outside. "Come here, girl. Time to go home." Liberty's ears flattened against her skull, but she didn't release Marcus's arm. She knew Sterling's voice, knew what it meant. More wire, more pain, more systematic breaking of everything that made her who she was. "She's not going anywhere with you," Bill called back. "Oh, but she is," Sterling replied, his voice carrying closer to the front door. "You see, William, you've made this much more complicated than it needed to be. Marcus was supposed to retrieve Liberty quietly, with minimal fuss, but now you've assaulted a federal contractor, interfered with official research, and stolen classified military assets." The front door handle turned slowly. "That kind of behavior requires a more permanent solution," Sterling continued as he stepped into the hallway. "The kind that leaves no witnesses to file complaints or ask inconvenient questions." Bill kept his pistol trained on Marcus while watching for Sterling's approach. The hallway offered multiple angles of attack, and Bill's position behind the recliner provided limited cover. This was quickly becoming untenable. "Liberty's not going back to your laboratory," Bill said, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "Laboratory?" Sterling laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Oh, William, you misunderstand completely. There is no laboratory. There are only woods and wire and the gradual process of transformation. Liberty has become my life's work, a perfect case study in the relationship between suffering and strength." He appeared in the living room doorway, his own weapon drawn but held casually at his side. Up close, Bill could see the man's face clearly for the first time. Sterling's eyes held the hollow brightness of fanaticism, but underneath lay something else, a grief so profound it had curdled into madness. 2 years, Sterling said softly. 2 years I've been conditioning her, studying her responses, documenting her evolution. Each capture teaches her something new about survival. Each escape proves her growing capabilities. She's becoming the perfect soldier, one who can endure anything and still complete the mission. "What mission?" Bill demanded. Sterling smiled, and the expression chilled Bill to his bones. "To prove that love is weakness, that attachment leads to failure, that the only reliable emotion for a soldier is duty." His gaze shifted to Liberty, still clamped onto Marcus's arm. "She keeps returning to you, William, despite abandonment, despite neglect, despite the obvious fact that you don't want her. That behavior must be corrected." The truth hit Bill like a sledgehammer. Sterling hadn't been studying Liberty's resilience. He'd been trying to break her capacity for love. Each torture session was designed to teach her that caring led to pain, that trust led to betrayal, that the only safe response to the world was aggressive isolation. "You're trying to turn her into you," Bill said. Sterling's smile widened. "Very good. Yes, I'm trying to save her from the weakness that killed my daughter. Emotional attachment makes soldiers hesitate. Hesitation gets people killed. Liberty will learn to suppress every instinct except survival and mission completion. And if she doesn't learn, then she becomes another failure to document," Sterling said with clinical detachment. "But I don't think that will be necessary. Watching you die should provide sufficient trauma to complete her conditioning." Sterling raised his weapon, and Bill knew his time had run out. Sterling's finger tightened on the trigger, and Bill saw his own death reflected in the man's cold eyes. Time slowed to the rhythm of his failing heart, each beat echoing like thunder in his ears. This was how it would end, not from pills or despair, but trying to protect something he loved. The gunshot rang out like the crack of Judgment Day. Bill felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him sideways into Margaret's china cabinet. Porcelain exploded around him in a shower of wedding gifts and anniversary memories, each shard catching the morning light like fallen stars. His father's Colt clattered across the hardwood floor, sliding under the couch where Bill's arthritic fingers couldn't reach. "Dad!" The voice came from somewhere far away, filtered through cotton and ringing ears. Bill's vision grayed around the edges, but he fought to stay conscious. Someone needed him. Something depended on his strength. Liberty released Marcus with a sound like tearing fabric, pivoting towards Sterling with lethal intent. But her injuries betrayed her. The blood loss, the exhaustion, the systematic torture of 2 years had taken their toll. Her powerful hindquarters collapsed as she lunged, sending her sprawling across the glass-strewn floor. "No!" Bill's voice cracked like a broken bell as he watched Liberty struggle to rise. Blood pumped from his shoulder wound in rhythm with his heartbeat, each pulse weakening him further. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from all sides. Sterling stood over Liberty's prone form, his weapon trained on her massive head. 2 years of research, and it ends with a whimper. Disappointing, really. I'd hoped she'd show more fight. "Please," Bill gasped, his voice barely audible. "She's all I have left of him." "She's a failed experiment," Sterling replied with clinical detachment. "Attachment makes soldiers weak." "Your son learned that lesson the hard way." The casual mention of Michael's death ignited something primal in Bill's failing consciousness. With the last of his strength, he lunged for the backup pistol Margaret had insisted he keep in the end table drawer. His fingers found the grip just as Sterling's attention shifted back to him. "Touching," Sterling said, swinging his weapon toward Bill. "The old man dies, protecting what he once abandoned. There's irony worthy of documentation." Bill's vision blurred, but muscle memory guided his movements. 40 years of Navy training compressed into a single moment of clarity. He raised the small revolver, feeling its familiar weight settle into his palm like an old friend returning home. Sterling's face showed mild surprise, as if he'd forgotten that old men could still bite. "You're bleeding out, William. Even if you shoot me, you'll be dead in minutes." "Marcus will finish what I started." "Maybe," Bill whispered, his voice growing weaker with each word. "But I won't let you hurt her anymore." Time crystallized into a single, perfect moment. Sterling's finger on the trigger, Bill's trembling hand fighting to hold steady, Liberty's labored breathing the only sound in the universe. Everything balanced on the edge of a blade. The second gunshot shattered the morning silence. Sterling staggered backward, clutching his chest with dawning disbelief. Dark blood seeped between his fingers, staining his crisp white shirt. "Impossible," he gasped. "You're just a broken old man." "I'm a United States Navy veteran," Bill replied, his voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "And she's my family." Sterling's legs buckled, sending him crashing into the coffee table Michael had built in high school shop class. The hand-carved wood splintered under his weight, 40 years of memories destroyed in an instant. But Bill felt no regret, only grim satisfaction that Michael's final gift had helped bring down his tormentor. Marcus struggled to his feet, cradling his mangled arm against his chest. Liberty's bite had done severe damage, severing tendons and crushing bone. His face was pale with shock and blood loss, but his eyes still held dangerous intelligence. "You killed a federal officer," Marcus snarled, reaching for Sterling's dropped weapon with his good hand. "That's death penalty stuff, old man." Bill tried to track Marcus with the revolver, but his strength was fading fast. The shoulder wound had nicked an artery, and his shirt was soaked with blood. Each heartbeat sent fresh waves of darkness washing over his vision. "Liberty," he whispered. "Get up, girl. I need you to get up." Liberty raised her massive head, amber eyes focusing on Bill with tremendous effort. She'd heard the desperation in his voice, recognized the command buried beneath the plea. With a sound like breaking glass, she forced herself onto her feet. Marcus had Sterling's pistol now, his finger finding the trigger despite his injuries. "Should have minded your own business, Grandpa." Liberty moved with the last reserves of her strength, muscle memory overriding pain and exhaustion. She'd been trained to protect her handler, an instinct kicked in where conscious thought failed. Her massive frame struck Marcus center mass, driving him backward through the kitchen doorway. The sound of their struggle echoed through the house, growls and curses, and the crash of falling furniture. Then silence, broken only by Liberty's labored breathing and the distant sound of sirens. Bill's consciousness flickered like a candle in wind. He could smell cordite and blood, hear the approaching wail of emergency vehicles, feel his life ebbing away one heartbeat at a time. Margaret's voice whispered in his ear, gentle and loving. "It's okay, Billy. You can rest now. You saved her." But as darkness closed around him, Bill felt something warm and wet against his face. Liberty had returned to his side, her massive head resting on his chest. She was wounded, exhausted, probably dying, but she'd chosen to spend her final moments with him. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her fur. "I'm so sorry I let you down." Liberty's tail moved once. Not quite a wag, more like forgiveness. Her breathing synced with his, both of them holding on through sheer force of will. In the distance, Bill could hear voices shouting, boots on gravel, the sound of salvation arriving too late. The emergency room at Charleston General Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, a sterile maze where time moved differently and hope wore surgical scrubs. Bill drifted in and out of consciousness, tethered to life by machines that beeped with mechanical persistence, marking each heartbeat like a countdown he couldn't stop. Through morphine-clouded vision, he watched uniformed figures move past his bed, police officers, federal investigators, military personnel whose insignia blurred into meaningless shapes. They spoke in hushed voices about jurisdictions and cover-ups, about classified research projects that officially didn't exist. "Where's Liberty?" he asked every nurse who entered his room, his voice a raspy whisper that barely carried past the oxygen mask. The answers varied. She was being treated, she was evidence, she was fine, she was gone. Nobody would look him in the eye when they spoke. On the third day, when Bill's chest tube had been removed and his blood pressure had stabilized enough to sustain conversation, a woman in a crisp dress uniform entered his room. The eagle on her collar identified her as a colonel, and the gentle lines around her eyes suggested someone who'd seen enough tragedy to recognize it in others. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Colonel Sarah McKenna, Army Criminal Investigation Division. I need to ask you some questions about what happened at your home." Bill studied her face, noting the way her gaze didn't waver when she spoke. "Are you here to arrest me for killing Sterling?" Dr. Richard Sterling was dishonorably discharged from the Army 3 years ago, Colonel McKenna replied carefully. Any research he was conducting was unauthorized and illegal. You defended yourself and your property against armed intruders. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Bill understood. Officially, Sterling had been a rogue operator, not a government contractor. His death would be classified as justified homicide, not the murder of a federal agent. What about Marcus? In custody. Severe injuries to his right arm, but he'll survive to face charges. We're still determining which charges exactly. McKenna pulled a chair closer to Bill's bed. The investigation is complicated by the fact that Sterling's activities appear to have been supported by certain factions within the military research community. Bill's heart monitor accelerated. You mean the government knew what he was doing? I mean there are people in positions of authority who believed Sterling's methods might produce valuable results. Those people are currently being reassigned to less sensitive positions. McKenna's tone suggested that reassignment was a euphemism for something more permanent. Where is Liberty? Bill asked again, and this time McKenna's expression softened. That's complicated. She's alive, but her legal status is unclear. Sterling had documentation claiming she was part of an ongoing military research project. There are people who want to continue that research under more humane conditions. Bill tried to sit up, ignoring the fire that shot through his shoulder. She's not a research subject. She's a retired soldier. I agree, McKenna said quietly. But I'm not the only one making decisions here. The Army has invested significant resources in military working dog programs. Liberty represents years of training and experience that some people consider too valuable to retire. The machines around Bill's bed began beeping faster as his blood pressure spiked. They want to put her back in service? They want to study her responses to trauma and develop new training protocols based on her psychological profile. Sterling's methods were brutal, but his documentation of Liberty's behavioral changes has scientific value. Bill felt something cold settle in his chest, colder than the hospital air. Colder than the machines keeping him alive. You're talking about her like she's equipment. I'm talking about her like she's a soldier who served her country with honor, McKenna corrected. But soldiers don't always get to choose their assignments, Mr. Thompson, even retired ones. Through the window, Bill could see the Kanawha River winding through the valley below, carrying autumn leaves toward the Ohio and eventually the Mississippi. The water looked peaceful from this distance, but he knew it was deceiving. Currents ran deep and dangerous beneath the surface, just like the bureaucracy that wanted to reclaim liberty. What would happen to her? He asked. Best case scenario. She'd be assigned to a humane research facility where her responses to various stimuli would be documented for training purposes. She'd be well-fed, receive excellent veterinary care, and live in climate-controlled facilities with regular exercise. That's the best case? McKenna nodded. The worst case involves facilities where the definition of humane is more flexible. Bill closed his eyes, feeling older than his 72 years. Liberty had survived 2 years of torture in the wilderness, only to face the prospect of a lifetime of clinical imprisonment. The irony was suffocating. She'd be fed and sheltered and studied until the day she died, never again feeling grass beneath her paws or choosing where to sleep. There is another option, McKenna said carefully. If Liberty were declared medically unfit for further service due to trauma-related behavioral issues, she could be retired to civilian care. With the right documentation, she could be classified as a therapy animal for a disabled veteran. Bill opened his eyes, searching McKenna's face for hidden meanings. What kind of documentation? The kind that requires a psychiatric evaluation, showing severe PTSD that makes her unsuitable for military applications but well-suited for emotional support work. McKenna's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone walking through a minefield. Of course, such an evaluation would need to be conducted by a qualified professional who understands both military protocols and civilian needs. Someone like you? I'm not a psychiatrist, Mr. Thompson, but I do know one who specializes in military working dog psychology. Someone who might be willing to visit Liberty and assess her current mental state. McKenna stood, smoothing wrinkles from her uniform. Of course, such an assessment would need to be requested by her current guardian. Someone with legal standing to make medical decisions on her behalf. Bill's head was spinning, whether from medication or hope, he couldn't tell. Who's her current guardian? According to the documentation Sterling filed, she was assigned to your care as part of his research protocol. Technically, you're her legal foster guardian pending completion of the study. McKenna's smile was barely visible, but it warmed something in Bill's chest. The study has been terminated due to the principal investigator's death, but the custody arrangement remains valid. You're saying she's mine? I'm saying you have legal authority to make decisions about her medical care and living arrangements. What you choose to do with that authority is up to you. Bill felt tears threatening behind his eyelids. After 3 years of guilt and grief, after abandoning Liberty when she needed him most, he was being offered a chance at redemption. But redemption came with responsibility, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to bear it. What if I mess up again? He asked. What if I can't handle taking care of her? McKenna's expression gentled. Mr. Thompson, 3 days ago you took a bullet defending her from people who wanted to hurt her. I think your commitment to her welfare has been adequately demonstrated. Through the hospital window, Bill could see storm clouds gathering over the mountains, dark and heavy with unshed rain. But for the first time in 3 years, the approaching weather didn't fill him with dread. Weather was temporary. Storms passed, seasons changed, and morning always followed the darkest night. Where is she now? He asked. Charleston Animal Hospital, under protective custody. The veterinarian there is Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, and she's been taking excellent care of Liberty's injuries. The dog's been asking for you, apparently. Asking for me? Waiting by the door whenever she hears men's voices. Won't eat unless someone with a military bearing feeds her by hand. Dr. Rodriguez thinks she's waiting for you to come get her. McKenna gathered her paperwork, preparing to leave. I'll have Dr. Harrison, our psychiatric specialist, contact you about scheduling Liberty's evaluation. In the meantime, focus on getting well. You're no good to her if you don't recover. As McKenna reached the door, Bill called out to her. Colonel, why are you helping us? She paused, her hand on the door frame. Because 15 years ago, I lost my partner in Afghanistan, military working dog named Thor, best soldier I ever served with. And when his tour ended, the Army decided he was too aggressive for civilian adoption. They put him down rather than deal with his PTSD. Her voice carried old pain, carefully controlled, but never forgotten. Nobody should have to die just because the system failed them. After she left, Bill lay in the hospital bed watching rain begin to spatter against the window. For the first time in months, he found himself planning for the future instead of mourning the past. Liberty was coming home. 6 weeks later, Bill stood in the parking lot of Charleston Animal Hospital, his left arm still in a sling, but his heart lighter than it had been in 3 years. The November air carried the promise of winter, but inside the veterinary clinic something far more precious than seasonal change was waiting for him. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez emerged from the building with a smile that could have powered the entire hospital. Behind her, moving slowly but steadily, came Liberty. The German shepherd's coat had regained its lustrous thickness, and her amber eyes held an alertness that spoke of healing rather than mere survival. "She's been ready for this moment since the day she arrived," Dr. Rodriguez said, handing Bill the leash with ceremonial gravity. Every time a car pulled into the parking lot, she'd position herself by the window and wait. She knew you were coming. Liberty approached Bill with the careful dignity of a soldier reporting for duty. She sat at his feet, looking up at him with eyes that held forgiveness, hope, and something deeper. Recognition that they belonged together, had always belonged together, despite the years of separation and pain. Bill knelt awkwardly, his healing shoulder protesting the movement, and placed his good hand on Liberty's massive head. Her tail began to wag, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as she realized this wasn't another temporary visit. "Hello, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Ready to come home?" Liberty's response was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. She leaned into his touch with the complete trust of a creature that had endured hell and chosen to love anyway. Bill felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finding something precious that he'd thought was lost forever. The drive home passed in comfortable silence, Liberty's presence filling the truck cab with a warmth that had nothing to do with the vehicle's heating system. She sat in the passenger seat, Michael's old spot, and Bill could swear he felt his son's approval radiating from somewhere just beyond perception. The cabin looked different when they arrived, though Bill couldn't immediately identify what had changed. Then he realized it felt like a home again instead of a mausoleum. The rooms that had echoed with emptiness for 3 years now hummed with possibility. Liberty explored the house with the methodical thoroughness of a security sweep, checking corners and closets with professional efficiency. But when she discovered Michael's old bedroom, preserved exactly as he'd left it before his final deployment, she stopped. Her tail drooped, and she made a soft sound that could have been a whine or a prayer. "I kept it the same," Bill said, standing in the doorway beside her. "Couldn't bring myself to change anything?" Liberty padded to Michael's bed and lay down on the military-issue blanket, her massive frame somehow fitting perfectly in the space their boy had once occupied. She looked up at Bill with eyes that seemed to ask permission. "It's yours now," Bill said. "All of it, the room, the house, whatever you need." But Liberty didn't stay in Michael's room. After a few minutes, she rose and walked to the living room, where she settled on the rug in front of the fireplace, close enough to keep watch over Bill, far enough to give him space. The message was clear. She wasn't trying to replace Michael or recreate the past. She was offering to build something new. That evening, as Bill prepared dinner for two for the first time in months, he found himself talking to Liberty the way he'd once talked to Margaret, sharing the small details of his day, his plans for tomorrow, his thoughts about the weather. Liberty listened with the attentiveness of someone who understood that conversation was about connection, not just communication. "Dr. Harrison says your evaluation went well," Bill told her as he set down her food bowl. "Severe PTSD, unsuitable for military service but excellent candidate for therapy work. Funny how the truth can set you free when it's written on the right forms." Liberty's tail wagged as she approached her dinner, but she waited for Bill to give the command before eating. Old habits died hard, and some training was too deeply ingrained to forget. "At ease, soldier," Bill said softly, and Liberty began to eat with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned never to waste food. The first week passed quietly, both of them learning to live together again. Bill discovered that Liberty had nightmares, just like he did. Moments when she'd whimper and twitch in her sleep, reliving traumas that would never fully heal. When those episodes struck, Bill would wake her gently, offering comfort without questions. In return, Liberty seemed to sense when Bill's own demons surfaced, positioning herself close enough to provide warmth and weight, grounding him in the present moment. On the 8th day, as Bill was splitting firewood behind the house, Liberty's behavior changed. Her ears pricked forward, her body tensed, and she released the low growl that meant danger. Bill followed her gaze to the tree line, where a familiar black sedan sat parked on the access road. "More government types?" Bill asked, reaching for the cell phone Colonel McKenna had given him. "Or just curious neighbors?" The car's occupants didn't emerge immediately, content to observe from a distance. Bill counted at least 2 figures in the front seats, possibly more in the back. Professional surveillance, the kind that suggested official interest rather than casual observation. Liberty's growl deepened, but she stayed close to Bill instead of positioning herself for attack. Her training had evolved. She was learning to protect through proximity rather than aggression. The standoff lasted 15 minutes before the sedan's engine started and the vehicle disappeared down the mountain road. Bill made a note of the license plate and called Colonel McKenna, who promised to investigate. "There are still people who believe Sterling's research had merit," she explained during their conversation. "Most of them have been reassigned or retired, but bureaucracies have long memories. Keep your phone close and don't hesitate to call if they come back." That night, Bill found himself checking the locks on doors he'd left unsecured for months. Liberty seemed to approve of his caution, conducting her own security sweep of the property before settling down for the night. The second week brought unexpected visitors of a different sort. Dr. Rodriguez arrived with a van full of supplies, premium dog food, medical equipment, toys that Liberty regarded with polite confusion. She'd forgotten how to play, Bill realized, another casualty of her time in the wilderness. "The community has been following your story," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they unloaded donations. "Local businesses, veteran organizations, even some folks from out of state. Everyone wants to help Liberty transition to civilian life." Among the gifts was a package that made Bill's chest tighten with emotion. A new collar with Liberty's name engraved alongside a simple inscription, "Home at Last." Attached was a note from the Charleston Veterans of Foreign Wars Post. "Welcome home, soldier, both of you." Liberty wore the collar with obvious pride, her head held high as she accompanied Bill on their daily walks around the property. The mountain air seemed to agree with her. Her coat grew thicker, her steps more confident, her appetite more robust. She was remembering how to be a dog instead of just surviving like one. But the real breakthrough came during the 3rd week, when Bill was working in his small garden and Liberty discovered a tennis ball that had been lost under a pile of leaves for years. She approached it cautiously, as if it might explode, then gently picked it up in her massive jaws. "You remember toys?" Bill asked, setting down his rake. Liberty dropped the ball at his feet and took a step back, tail wagging tentatively. The invitation was unmistakable. Bill picked up the ball and threw it across the yard, watching as Liberty's training warred with her instincts. For a moment she stood frozen between disciplines, the military dog who waited for commands and the pet who wanted to chase things that moved. Then she ran. The sight of Liberty bounding across the yard, ears flying and tongue lolling, brought tears to Bill's eyes. This was joy in its purest form, a creature remembering what it meant to play, to chase, to exist for pleasure rather than survival. When she returned with the ball, Bill threw it again and again until both of them were exhausted and laughing, or at least Bill was laughing, while Liberty made the huffing sound that passed for laughter in dogs. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Bill found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. Not with dread or resignation, but with genuine curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. "You know what I think?" he told Liberty, who was sprawled at his feet like a furry rug. "I think Michael would be proud of us. Both of us. We figured out how to keep going, how to take care of each other." Liberty's tail thumped against the porch boards, and in that simple sound, Bill heard agreement, forgiveness, and something else. The promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The black sedan never returned, but Bill kept Colonel McKenna's number programmed into his phone anyway. Some threats required vigilance, but others dissolved when confronted with the simple reality of an old man and his dog building a life together one day at a time. In his bedroom that night, Bill packed away the bottle of pills he'd counted so carefully weeks before. He wouldn't be needing them anymore. Outside his window, Liberty completed her evening patrol of the property, checking perimeters and shadows with professional thoroughness before returning to her bed by the fireplace. For the first time in 3 years, William Thompson fell asleep without wondering whether he'd wake up. He had responsibilities now, purposes that extended beyond his own pain. He had Liberty, and Liberty had him, and sometimes that was enough to build a whole new world. 3 months after Liberty came home, Bill Thompson discovered something he'd forgotten existed: Sunday morning contentment. He sat on his front porch with coffee that actually tasted good instead of merely functional, watching Liberty patrol the perimeter of their property with the satisfied efficiency of someone protecting what mattered. The foreclosure notice had disappeared from his kitchen counter, replaced by donation checks from strangers who'd heard their story. The suicide note had been replaced by grocery lists that included premium dog food and tennis balls. The pill bottle had been replaced by Liberty's medication schedule, carefully maintained to manage the arthritis that reminded both of them that some wounds heal slowly but completely. "Morning, beautiful," Bill called to Liberty as she completed her security sweep and trotted back toward the porch. Her tail wagged at the sound of his voice, but her eyes continued scanning the tree line. Old habits died hard, and vigilance was a responsibility she took seriously. The phone rang from inside the house, and Bill groaned as he struggled out of his rocking chair. At 72, sudden movements still triggered protests from joints that had accumulated decades of wear. But Liberty was already moving, padding through the open door to investigate the sound. "Thompson residence," Bill answered, settling into Margaret's old kitchen chair. "Mr. Thompson, this is Nancy Williams from the Charleston Veterans Administration. I hope I'm not calling too early." Bill checked the clock on the microwave. 8:30 a.m. "Not too early, Ms. Williams. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's what you can do for us. We've been following your story, and we have a proposal that might interest you." Nancy's voice carried the kind of carefully controlled excitement that suggested good news wrapped in bureaucratic caution. "We're starting a new program for veterans struggling with PTSD and depression. Therapy dog visits, emotional support groups, that sort of thing. We'd like Liberty to be one of our therapy dogs." Bill's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "You want Liberty to work again?" "Not work in the traditional sense, more like sharing her story, showing other veterans that recovery is possible, that bonds can be rebuilt, that it's never too late to find purpose again." Nancy paused, allowing her words to settle. "Of course, this would be entirely voluntary, and you'd be with her every step of the way. No overnight deployments, no separation, no pressure." Through the kitchen window, Bill could see Liberty lying in a patch of morning sunlight, her massive frame relaxed but alert. She'd earned her retirement, paid her dues in blood and sacrifice. But she'd also rediscovered her capacity for joy, and maybe sharing that gift with others who were still lost in darkness wasn't work. Maybe it was healing. "What would it involve?" Bill asked. "Hospital visits, mostly. Group sessions where veterans can interact with Liberty, share their stories, see that survival is possible. You'd both be volunteers, free to set your own schedule, free to say no to anything that doesn't feel right." Bill thought about the pills he'd counted so carefully months ago, the rope he'd considered, the loaded pistol that had seemed like the only solution to pain that felt infinite. Liberty had saved him not through dramatic intervention, but through the simple requirement that someone needed him to get up each morning, to be present, to care about something beyond his own suffering. "Can I think about it?" Bill asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll send you some information about the program, and you can decide if it's something you and Liberty might enjoy." After Nancy hung up, Bill sat in the kitchen for a long time, sipping coffee that had gone cold while he thought about purpose and responsibility and the strange mathematics of healing. Liberty appeared in the doorway, as if sensing his contemplation, and settled at his feet with the patient attention of someone waiting for important decisions. "What do you think, girl? Ready to help some other broken soldiers figure out how to put the pieces back together?" Liberty's tail thumped against the linoleum, and Bill took that as provisional approval. The first packet from the VA arrived 3 days later, thick with forms and regulations and carefully worded disclaimers. But buried among the bureaucratic language were photographs that made Bill's chest tighten with recognition. Veterans in hospital beds, their eyes holding the same hollow emptiness he'd seen in his own mirror for 3 years. One photo in particular stopped him cold. An elderly man sitting alone in a wheelchair, staring out a window with the expression of someone who'd given up hope entirely. The caption read, "Harold Peterson, 74, Army veteran, hospitalized for severe depression following his wife's death." Bill studied Harold's face, seeing himself reflected in every line of grief and surrender. This man needed what Bill had found. Not just medical treatment or therapeutic intervention, but the simple knowledge that connection was still possible, that love could still surprise you, that purpose could be discovered in the most unexpected places. "Looks like we've got work to do," Bill told Liberty, who was watching him with the attentive expression she reserved for important conversations. The training sessions began the following week at Charleston General Hospital. Bill and Liberty joined 6 other veteran dog teams, learning the protocols for therapeutic visits, the boundaries that protected both visitors and patients, the subtle signs that indicated when intervention was helpful versus when presence alone was enough. Liberty took to the work with natural grace, her military training translating seamlessly into civilian service. She seemed to understand instinctively when someone needed gentle contact versus respectful distance, when to offer comfort versus when to simply exist as proof that loyalty and love could survive anything. Their first official visit was to Harold Peterson, the man from the photograph. He sat in his wheelchair by the window, exactly as Bill had seen him in the picture, staring at nothing with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "Harold?" Bill approached carefully, Liberty walking beside him with perfect heel discipline. "I'm Bill Thompson, and this is Liberty. We're here to visit, if you'd like some company." Harold's gaze shifted slowly from the window to Bill's face, then down to Liberty's massive frame. For a moment his expression didn't change. Then something flickered. Not quite recognition, but curiosity. "She's a big one," Harold said, his voice rusty from disuse. "German shepherd, military working dog, retired." Bill settled into the visitor's chair, and Liberty positioned herself where Harold could reach her if he chose. "She's seen some things. Survived some things. Thought you might understand each other." Harold's hand moved slowly toward Liberty's head, stopping just short of contact. "My unit had a dog in Korea, shepherd mix named Duke. Saved our asses more times than I can count." "What happened to Duke?" Harold's hand finally made contact with Liberty's fur, and his entire posture changed. Shoulders relaxing, breathing deepening, something hard melting away from his expression. "Came home with me. Lived to be 15. Best friend I ever had." His voice cracked slightly. "Haven't had a dog since. Couldn't bear the thought of losing another one." "Liberty here taught me something about that," Bill said quietly. "Sometimes the fear of losing someone keeps us from loving them at all. But that's not protecting ourselves, that's just another way of dying." Harold's fingers worked through Liberty's thick coat, and she leaned into his touch with the same trust she'd shown Bill in the woods. How do you do it? How do you love something when you know it's going to hurt? Bill thought about Michael, about Margaret, about the years he'd wasted hiding from connection because it came with the guarantee of eventual loss. You do it because the love is worth the pain. You do it because being numb isn't the same as being safe. You do it because sometimes when you're brave enough to care about something again, you find out you're braver than you thought. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Harold stroking Liberty's fur while she provided the kind of solid, warm presence that medication couldn't replicate. When visiting hours ended, Harold had filled out an adoption application for the local animal shelter. "Same time next week?" Harold asked as Bill and Liberty prepared to leave. "Wouldn't miss it," Bill replied. Walking back to their truck, Bill felt something he hadn't experienced since Michael's deployment. The satisfaction of meaningful work, of contributing to something larger than his own survival. Liberty's tail wagged with what could only be described as professional pride. They had found their new mission, showing other lost souls that the path home was still passable, that second chances were real, that love multiplied when shared rather than diminished. Some bonds, Bill realized, were too strong for death to break. They just learned new ways to serve. At 72, Bill Thompson thought his story was over. 3 years of grief had convinced him that purpose died with those we love, that connections were just setups for heartbreak, that the bravest thing an old man could do was surrender. Then Liberty, his son's military dog, stumbled back into his life, broken and betrayed just like him. Together, they discovered something our generation knows but sometimes forgets. It's never too late to matter again. Love doesn't end when loss begins. It just finds new ways to serve. Bill and Liberty now spend their days proving to other veterans that healing is possible, that second chances are real, that the courage to care again is the greatest victory any soldier can win. Their story reminds us that our most important chapters might still be unwritten, that wisdom earned through pain becomes medicine for others' wounds, that the hearts we thought were finished might just be getting started. Sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2, but it always comes when we choose connection over isolation, service over surrender. What seemed like an ending was actually a beginning, not just for Bill and Liberty, but for everyone whose life they touch. Discussion questions. Have you ever discovered unexpected purpose after thinking your meaningful years were behind you? What helped you realize that your story wasn't over yet?